The image that I'm about to show you is of a spider from the Portia family. Now, there are currently about 130 families of spider, consisting of about 50,000 species, but of all those species of spider, the 17 that comprise the Portia family are somewhat unique. You see, it's fairly well understood that spiders are cannibalistic by nature. The females tend to eat the males after they've mated, the offspring feed off the mother after they're born, and sometimes they'll eat each other. And while there's some debate as to the frequency that this behavior occurs, it seems generally agreed that spiders would do this when they lack other options for food or prey for whatever reason. But what makes the Portia family so interesting to me is that it's the only type of spider that we currently know about that actively hunts other spiders. Not only that, but they do so in a way that has suggested that they possess some level of intelligence, especially compared to other creatures of its size. They seem to be able to adapt to problems and solve them, and then remember the solution to those problems. They can trick other spiders into leaving more secure areas of their webs in order to jump on them from distance. They're really quite interesting and incredible creatures when you think about it. But why am I even telling you this? Because at the end of the day, the majority of people watching this video are never going to have any use for this information. In fact, some people aren't even going to be able to watch this video because the mere mention of the word spider freaks them out. My mum's one of those people, and while I'm nowhere near as bad as that, I definitely don't have any fondness for the little things. It was much worse when I was younger. Maybe it's some sort of learned response. But that raises another question, which is, if you don't like spiders, how do you even know this? Well, to tell you the truth, I am fascinated by these things, and I feel almost compelled to know as much about them as I possibly can. And I think that my fear of them as a child is pretty much directly responsible for that. Because there's loads of little things out there that it would be far more valuable to know about, like mice. I would say that if you've got a mouse in your house, that is a far more pressing concern that you have to deal with. But to be completely honest, I don't know hardly anything about mice. In fact, if you asked me a few years ago, I couldn't even tell you the difference between a mouse and a rat. I never needed to know that. And you could say the same thing about spiders. Like, I never needed to know any of that info. And you'd be right. The only difference between the two things, at least that I can think of, is that I have never been afraid of mice in the same way that I have been of spiders. I've just been thinking lately about how our fears of something influence how we react to that thing. And I think that there's only really two responses that we have. Either we run away from it and avoid it as much as we can, which works as a survival instinct especially for our ancestors, but doesn't really become anything but restrictive when you bring in phobias and things that we have now. Or we become desperate to know as much as we can about it. No, I don't think that every pursuit of knowledge that you can do is motivated by fear. I highly doubt that someone who studies paintings, for instance, does so because they're afraid of brushes or anything like that. But then again, maybe they're afraid of their inability to express themselves. That doesn't matter. Um, I just find it interesting how fear produces these two primal responses in us, and I wonder how much of it has influenced the course of history. Like, maybe the reason we've crossed oceans, or we've went into space, or we've done any of the other things that human beings have done, split the atom, is because that we're afraid of those things, and we think that by understanding them, we'll be able to shed our fears, to conquer them. I think that's why, as a species, we're so fascinated by death. I mean, if you think about it, every recorded culture in history has some sort of explanation about what happens at the end of your life, whether it be you go to heaven or hell, or the underworld, or some other representation or journey towards the afterlife. Or even if you don't think of it in a spiritual sense, you might think that there's just like a black void forever or something in terms of what your conscience experiences. But everyone has something. And if you extend this beyond the scope of what happens to you as an individual, and you think of terms of like mass extinction, every culture has a story about what's going to happen when the world ends. You've got the Book of Revelations, or you've got Ragnarok, or if you want to think of it in more scientific terms, you've got things like the heat death of the universe, or even climate change. Whatever your position is on that, it should be easy to see that the primary motivation behind preventing it is that people are afraid. They're afraid of what's going to happen. And I think that the reason that this fear of death is so prevalent is because there's no way for us to understand it. It's not like a spider where you can study it, or an ocean where you can cross it, or anything that you can observe and measure. There's no expedition you can take to have a glimpse of what's on the other side of death. It's a one-way trip, and there's absolutely nothing that you can do to prepare for it. If you imagine that you have to pack a suitcase to go on a trip just for a weekend, and you're trying to figure out what you need to take with you, but if you don't know where you're going, all you can do is prepare in a kind of general type of way. Like there's nothing specific that you can do. There's nothing specific you can prepare for. The point is that this motivation by fear has pushed us both as a species and as individuals to really expand the limits of what we know. And I think that it's something that doesn't really get talked about when we think about our accomplishments. When we talk a lot about bravery and how brave it was for people to cross the ocean or to go up into space, but that bravery wouldn't mean anything if that fear also hadn't been there. I just think that it's something worth keeping in mind when you come across something that you're afraid of. That maybe you're being presented with an opportunity to really delve in and learn something that you wouldn't have otherwise. And you just don't know what could come out of that. It could be something really great.